Hello, my name is Jeremy, and this is the True Crime Chronicles channel. Today, I will tell you a horrifying story of how they caught a serial killer and how he committed his crimes. This case shocked the United Kingdom. On September 29, 2006, in St. Patrick's Church in Glasgow, United Kingdom, detectives discovered the body of a young woman. They could not have imagined that this crime was just the tip of the iceberg, the investigation of which led them to track down one of the most ruthless serial offenders in the country. Peter Britton Tobin was born on August 27, 1946, in Johnstone, Scotland, and was the youngest of 8 children in the family of Marjorie and Daniel Tobin. From an early age, Peter exhibited a difficult character, leading his parents to send him to a boarding school in 1953 when he was 7 years old. However, this seemingly did not bring any benefit, as he was later sent to a correctional institution. After completing this period, he moved to Brighton, England. At that time, Peter started a relationship with 17-year-old Margaret Mount, a young typist who was blinded by his attractive personality. In August 1969, they got married. However, Peter's cruel, controlling, and abusive nature soon became apparent. As if that wasn't enough, the man was also involved in criminal activities, and a year later was convicted and imprisoned in England for theft and forgery. After this, Margaret decided to divorce him. In 1973, Peter married Sylvia Jeffries, a 30-year-old local nurse. She too was struck by his irresistible charm. That same year, the couple had their first son, whom they named Ian, and a year later, a daughter, Claire, was born. But tragically, she died shortly after birth. Grieving the loss of their child, Sylvia became a victim of Peter's cruel treatment, leading her to leave in 1976, taking their young son with her. Decades later, in his 40s, Peter was ready for a new romance. This time, his chosen one was Kathy Wilson. At 16, Kathy was vulnerable, innocent, and impressionable, making it easy for him to start a relationship with her. They moved in together, and soon their son, Daniel, the couple's only child, was born. They married in 1989 and then moved to Scotland. It was a difficult time for Kathy. Her husband wouldn't allow her to go outside and tried to control every step she took. His violence also reached significant levels. As a result, the young woman gathered the courage and decided to flee with her son in the late 1990s. It's unknown whether Kathy's departure was the reason for the worst aspects of the man's character to surface, but it's clear that from this moment on, Peter unleashed the most terrible part of himself into the world, ready to cause much harm. Unfortunately, his path crossed with that of a lovely girl named Vicki Hamilton. Vicki was born in Scotland in 1976 and was the second child of Michael and Janet Hamilton, a married couple who had previously had their firstborn, daughter Sharon. Later came Lee and Lindsay. However, there were serious disagreements between the spouses, and the most correct decision was divorce. Vicki, Lee, and Lindsay were left in the care of their mother, with whom they had to move to South London. The eldest daughter, Sharon, remained in Bathgate, but this distance did not prevent Vicki and Sharon from maintaining their former close relationship. When Vicki turned 15, Sharon decided it was a good opportunity for her sister to take a step towards the independence that teenagers craved. After the 15-year-old traveled to Scotland for a weekend, she was to return to her mother's home. It was the first trip she had ever made alone by bus. Sharon considered it a small but meaningful adventure. On Saturday, February 9, 1991, the sisters went shopping and chatted non-stop. Sunday was no different than any other day, except that Vicki was very nervous about the trip. The evening of February 10th was cold and snowy. Vicki checked to see if she had enough money to pay the fare and, with her sister, checked one last time the route the bus would take. Then they hugged each other tightly. The girl stood at the bus stop, snacking on a bag of chips, across from the police station. And it was there, while waiting for transportation, that her path crossed with Peter's. Forcibly dragging Vicki into his car, he raped her, and then, either to stop her reporting him or out of malice, took her life. He kept the girl's purse. When Vicki did not arrive at her mother's house and there was no word from her, the family began searching for her in desperation. At the same time, they alerted the authorities about her absence. Once the police began investigating the disappearance, Vicki's face became one of the most recognizable in Scotland, and the search operation became one of the largest in the country's history. While the case was causing a stir in Scotland, Peter decided to move to the southeast of England, specifically to Margate, where he settled in a beautiful house with a garden. There, he brought the lifeless body of Vicki. Peter wrapped her remains in plastic and hid them behind a carefully poured layer of concrete, then covered everything with soil. Neighbors thought he had dug a sandbox for his young son, who was 3 years old at the time. Peter's name never appeared in the initial investigation into Vicki's disappearance. The police found no leads on Vicki's whereabouts and considered her a likely runaway, viewing her as an unhappy teenager due to her parents' divorce. Their theory of voluntary disappearance was reinforced on February 21, 1991, when Vicki's purse was found near the main bus station in Edinburgh. Peter, always a step ahead of the authorities, created this false lead and achieved his goal, completely changing the course of the investigation. Detectives spent 2 fruitless months searching in London. It is known that Vicki's mother died soon after. Over the next decade, Vicki's family and town residents continued to follow the case, but the police listed more than 7,000 names in the file, took nearly 4,000 statements, presented about 500 documents, and 380 potential pieces of physical evidence. All this, however, led to a dead end, and eventually, the case was shelved. The next young woman who had the misfortune of encountering Peter was Dena McNichol, a native of Essex who had a brother and 3 sisters. Her father was a jazz musician, and her mother had died many years ago in a car accident at the age of 18. Dena was a good-hearted, happy girl and a wonderful friend. She had just finished high school and had high hopes for her future. On one hand, she wanted to take a year off, possibly to go on a journey, and on the other hand, she wanted to attend university. But at the moment, nothing was certain because although Dena had applied, she hadn't received a response from any higher education institution. During the first weekend of August 1991, Dena attended a music festival in Hampshire. There, she met a young man named David Tremlett. Between dances, they discovered that they liked each other. On Sunday, August 4th, they spent the night together in a tent. The next day, Dena helped him dismantle the tent, and they agreed that each of them would hitchhike back home. However, since part of the route was the same, they decided to hitchhike together. Tired but happy, the young couple hit the road to catch a ride. That's when Peter appeared and offered to give them a lift. David got out of the car first, and Dena wrote down his phone number before saying goodbye. Alone with the unknown driver, the girl was about to experience a real nightmare. On the same Monday, August 5, 1991, he did the same as with Vicki. Dena's scarf served as a gag. After committing the crime, Peter withdrew money from Dena's account at ATMs in Hampshire and Sussex. When her relatives noticed that someone was withdrawing money from Dena's account, they immediately suspected that something was wrong. Her family knew how carefully she saved every penny and what she planned to use that money for, either for traveling or continuing her education. Days and weeks went by, and the worst part for the family was living in uncertainty. Even if no one spoke it aloud, everyone was sure that something terrible had happened. After all, if Dena were alive, she would have already returned home or called to explain her absence. As for Peter, he left Margate without saying goodbye or explaining anything. Later, in 1993, he settled in Hampshire, specifically in a rented apartment in Leek Park. He argued that he wanted to be closer to his son. On August 4, 1993, 2 14-year-olds went to visit a local woman, but the person they were looking for was not home, so they decided to ask other neighbors if they had seen her. As a result, they knocked on Peter's door. The man saw a unique opportunity and invited them into his home to wait for the person they were looking for. The girls saw that the man's 5-year-old son was in the apartment, mistook him for a friendly person, and agreed to enter. But there is another version about the reasons for this meeting, which was not accidental. The 2 girls came to Peter's home in response to a request for a babysitter that the man had made. They trusted him because when they arrived, they saw his son and stayed to look after him. Everyone agrees that when the child fell asleep, Peter tied them up, threatened them with a knife, and forced them to drink alcohol. He then beat them and raped them, injuring one of the girls. Just when they thought their lives would end at the hands of this extremely cruel man, luckily a boy woke up. he saved them from the same fatal fate that befell Vicki and Dena. In an effort to keep his son from realizing what had happened and what kind of father he was, the man decided to leave the apartment with the child. According to some reports, Peter left around 2 a.m., but before that he turned on the gas in the kitchen, hoping to complete his monstrous task. However, the girls regained consciousness and managed to escape. They went to the police and reported all the abuse committed by the subject, whom they described in detail. Peter returned the child to his mother and joined a religious sect called the Communion of Jesus under a false name. He hoped to go unnoticed there, but in the meantime, the media published his photograph provided by the police, and his face became widely known. As a result of this mass media coverage, information about this man started pouring in, and his car was also identified. Thanks to the BBC Crime Watch program, he was located, and after 40 days on the run, he was captured in Brighton. He appeared in court on May 18, 1994, where he pleaded guilty to sexual assault and indecent acts against 2 young girls and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. However, Peter did not serve his full sentence and was released in 2004 at the age of 58. Immediately after his release from prison, he returned to Scotland, aiming to move away from the area where his name was registered as a sex offender. For a while, he managed to evade capture until 2006, when, under a false name and appearing as a homeless person, he knocked on the door of the Church of St. Patrick in Glasgow. To avoid exposure, he took the name Peter McLaughlin. Dennis and Katie Curran, a married couple from the church's charitable group, will never forget that evening when a homeless man seeking shelter approached them. Despite his vulnerable appearance, Katie had a bad feeling about this man. Peter was raised as a Catholic, and he soon felt comfortable in this church. Furthermore, his apparent begging was a very functional cover because he only elicited sympathy from the parishioners, and few people paid much attention to him. Therefore, he freely roamed the church, which was an ideal hiding place for him. However, his predatory nature remained untouched, and being in a sacred place held no value for him. Calculating every move, Peter showed a willingness to participate in the repairs needed by the church. After about 6 or 7 weeks, he asked the priest to hire him as part of the maintenance staff. At that time, people in need or experiencing financial difficulties would often seek refuge in churches. It was in this way that Angelica Clark met Peter. Angelica was a 23-year-old girl from Poland who came to Scotland in the summer of 2006. She wanted to use her summer break to work, earn some money, and be able to finance language studies in her country. At that time, she was living in the parish house of St. Patrick's Church, where she also worked as a cleaner. Peter immediately took a liking to her, and somehow he managed to persuade the girl to help him with various tasks from time to time. On Sunday, September 24, 2006, Angelica spent several hours helping him paint a shed. Some parishioners saw them together, and at some point, Peter attacked her in the back of the chapel. 47-year-old Lika Brown and her husband, 46-year-old Andrew, heard a woman scream through the open windows of their multi-story house overlooking the church. In her subsequent statements, Lika described the sound as a short scream and said it sounded like someone was being forcibly restrained. It was so eerie that it made her get up from the couch and approach the window, but she saw nothing. The scream heard by the Browns was associated with the moment when Peter caught the young girl off guard as she stood with her back to him. He struck her forcefully and dragged her to the back of the chapel, where he continued to beat her. After she lost consciousness, he raped her and then inflicted several knife wounds. Peter hid the body in the basement under the floor near the confessional. At this point, Angelica was still alive. Several hours passed, and the parishioners noticed the absence of the young girl. That's when Dennis told his wife Katie about the unusual disappearance. The police immediately began an investigation and interviewed members of the community one by one. During these interviews, it was revealed that the last person everyone had seen with Angelica was Peter, albeit under the guise of Pete, a homeless laborer. He eventually became the prime suspect, and officers went to question him but found no evidence, so the investigation continued. Peter knew that it was only a matter of time before they found the body and traced it back to him, so he fled to London. By this time, Detective David Swindle had joined the investigation and began to suspect that this might not just be a disappearance. Everything they found, as well as the testimonies they gathered, made him think that Angelica was unlikely to be found alive. Finally, on September 29, 2006, authorities discovered the body in the chapel. This news shocked British society, especially because of the location chosen by the perpetrator to hide the body. Looking at the injuries sustained by the girl, Detective David suspected that the perpetrator was not acting for the first time, but he didn't yet know how horrific the man he would have to track down and imprison would turn out to be. However, there was more news to come. The DNA found at the crime scene and on the victim's body matched the data in the United Kingdom's National Criminal Intelligence Database. That's when they learned that the man they were looking for was Peter Tobin, whose fingerprints were also found at the crime scene. So the first step for the authorities was to publish his photograph in the media. His image was also sent nationwide for distribution, and the Scottish police contacted the Metropolitan Police, initiating a search throughout the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, Peter, who was in London, tried to hide in a place where he believed he wouldn't be sought. He went to a hospital pretending to have heart problems, claiming to have chest pain and weakness on the left side of his body. He identified himself as a plumber and called himself James Kelly. He was examined by Dr. Nick Losso, who conducted several tests. However, something in his demeanor and behavior made the doctor uncomfortable. Initially, he avoided eye contact, which was unusual for a patient. Then, when the tests didn't reveal any physical reasons for the pain he claimed to be experiencing, the doctor became suspicious. His suspicions were confirmed by a nurse who recognized Peter from a photograph circulating in the media. As a result, both the nurse and the doctor contacted the police. This phone call changed the entire dynamic of the investigation. On September 30th, police officer Alan Murray was dispatched to the hospital in London. Peter was taken to a room, and Alan went to talk to him. He was immediately arrested, although initially he was charged only with a violation of the sex offender registry. This strategy allowed the officers to buy time to prepare a criminal case against him. The evidence gathered by the police team under the leadership of Detective David led to Peter's trial for the crime against Angelica in late March 2007. Despite all the evidence against him, Peter denied committing violent acts against the young woman. However, in an attempt to shift blame for the rape, he claimed that they engaged in consensual sexual activity. Peter also denied providing false information to the police and hospital staff. After 6 weeks of legal proceedings, his lies and manipulations proved futile, as he was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 21 years. Detective David and his team were convinced that there was more to Peter's story. While the trial was ongoing, detectives delved into Peter's life, gathered additional evidence, and compiled a dossier with the involvement of various law enforcement agencies in the country. To avoid harming or interfering with Angelica's case, they preferred to conduct their work confidentially. The joint police operation was known as Anagram, and part of their work involved connecting missing persons cases to the places where Peter had been. It was during these investigations that investigators managed to establish 2 precise links, one in Bathgate and another in Margate. Several weeks later, a search was conducted in Peter's old house on the coast, where they found a knife with DNA samples hidden in the attic. However, there was nothing else there. They then went to the house where the man lived in Margate, and there was no doubt that they were dealing with a serial offender. Investigators dug up a sandbox in the garden of the house, which the man had made for his son, and found a female body there. When they continued searching at the same location, they found another one. A woman's handbag was also found at the scene, which the team preserved for DNA analysis. While forensic experts tried to establish the identities of the 2 victims, determine their ages, and estimate the date of death, they also analyzed the handbag found at the crime scene. It had very strong genetic traces, but there were no matches in the national DNA database. However, on June 1, 2007, the DNA matched Peter's fingerprint. This was a crucial breakthrough, and the officers deemed it necessary to move in this direction. On November 14, 2007, authorities confirmed that one of the bodies belonged to Vicki Hamilton, who disappeared when she was 15 years old during her first independent trip. Her family had been waiting for answers for 16 years. Later, it was announced that the second body found belonged to 18-year-old Dena McNichol, who was hitchhiking home after attending a concert. On September 1st, 2008, the Royal Prosecution Service contacted Peter's lawyers and charged him with the murder of Vicki, leading to his trial. Officers had to restrain Vicki's father, Michael, after he saw Peter face to face. As he later admitted, at that moment, he simply wanted this man to know that he was there, defending his daughter's name and protecting her memory. After a month-long trial on December 2nd, 2008, Peter was found guilty of Vicki's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The trial for Dena took place in December 2009. On December 16th, after the defense failed to provide evidence exonerating their client, the jury found Peter guilty of Dena's murder. He subsequently received his third life sentence. On November 22, 2007, it was reported that Tobin had been attacked by fellow inmates. The pedophile sustained minor injuries. Shortly before this, the serial killer had confessed to a total of 11 murders. Recently, Peter passed away in the hospital on October 8, 2022. If you liked this story, give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, don't forget to share your opinion in the comments. That was Jeremy. See you in the next video.